I think the best way to start this video is by saying the one thing that everybody has been saying about Dave Filoni, and that is, let the man cook. Because Ahsoka was what I expect from Star Wars. Listen, when it comes to Star Wars, we have to agree that it's not been in the greatest of places. Mind you, I did not have a huge problem with the sequel trilogy. I like the sequel trilogy. I like seeing Rey, I like seeing Kylo Ren, I love the new additions to the Star Wars family. I like that. I really do like that. I like those three movies, you know? There are aspects of each one of them that are not, like, fantastic, but overall, they're three very likable movies. Now, if you're a really hardcore fan of Star Wars, you probably like the original trilogy, or if you're someone who has seen the sequel trilogy and said that maybe it's not for me, but I still enjoy the prequel trilogy, then sure, that's probably your opinion as well. I like to say that all of Star Wars properties have their own, pros and cons. And as much as I like to say that Ahsoka has its pros and cons, the pros ultimately outweigh the cons when it comes to Ahsoka the series. Now take this into consideration. You're looking and listening to somebody who hasn't watched any of the Rebel series and has not watched Clone Wars. I probably watched 3 episodes, but I can't definitively say that I watched the entirety of Clone Wars. But I have not watched either of those series, and pretty much every character that's on screen here that I'm looking at is brand new to me. So I didn't know who Ezra is, I don't know who Sabine is, I don't know who ultimately Ahsoka is, even though we see her, from time to time on the, whether it be Mandalorian or see merchandise that has to do with Ahsoka. I am coming from a fresh and empty mind when it comes to the Ahsoka series. And the best part of me coming from a fresh and clear mind is that I didn't really know what to expect. All I knew is that we were getting a series about a Jedi who is now on a quest to kind of find Thrawn, which is also a very new character to me. So this is where things get really interesting, is that from my clear mindset, I see this as something that's fresh, something that's new, something that people have been wanting to see, because based on my very slim understanding of the Rebel series and Clone Wars, this is a continuation of those properties, and that we are kind of completing a piece of Rebels at the end of Rebels, where we see, Ezra, fly off into space with Thrawn. So it is a new concept, and seeing this series as a whole, I do have to say, this is exactly the type of thing that Star Wars and Lucasfilm need to focus their energy on, and truly make incredible series that tell these types of stories. And I just loved it. I can't deny it. Ahsoka was amazing. Now, seeing Rosario Dawson play Ahsoka in this series is really cool. I mean, it's my first true experience with Ahsoka, not counting when she shows up in Mandalorian, but it is my true first experience with her, and I think that she is this really strong Jedi that represents what Jedis are about. She lives in this sort of like value-based life that is supposed to be balanced and bring balance to things that surround the Force. And she wants to be a great educator. She wants to, teach Sabine to be a full-on Jedi, which she becomes in this series. And I think that it's a beautiful story that we see, this sort of arc that we see with Ahsoka from the beginning of the series toward the end, where she kind of like has these experiences with, Hayden Christensen, which, by the way, shows up in the series. Yes, Anakin Skywalker does show up on the series. And seeing that sort of like relationship that she had with Anakin prior to him becoming Darth Vader is very interesting, because we know the conflict that, lurks within her. We know that if she wanted it to, she could easily be swayed into, the dark side, because ultimately her master became one of the most powerful, dark, Sith lords to ever exist. So ultimately, we are given this sort of moment where she realizes, no, I'm not going to become that. I know that, Anakin, lost himself and Darth Vader took over. So she is within that conflict region. And it's so interesting to see her, grow from the beginning toward the end of this series. Even though that she does see that, growth within herself. She is ultimately in that constant conflict up until the end of this series. Now, apart from Ahsoka herself, we have to talk about Natasha Liu Bordizzo, who plays Sabine on the series. She is fantastic. She is really, really cool. I did not have any sort of prior understanding of who Sabine is, but we do see how badass Sabine is on this series, and it's very interesting to see that, dynamic between her and Ahsoka, because Ahsoka ultimately wants to train her the same way that Anakin trained her. So it is very interesting to see these concepts play out between the two of them, seeing them bicker, seeing that they don't ultimately get along, but they want to get along because they also want the same thing for each other. She wants to find, Ezra and find Thrawn, which is ultimately her goal. And, Sabine has the same thing. She wants to find Ezra. Maybe not so much Thrawn, but Ezra is definitely the focus. So we see her, forcing herself to become better throughout the season. And at some points she does do shady things, but we do see that Ahsoka understands why she did these things. And maybe, if it weren't for the guidance that she previously had, she would have, judged, Sabine for what she did. But ultimately, it didn't come to that, and Ahsoka ultimately understands why she made the decisions that she made. And Thrawn has shown himself to be a very menacing character throughout this series. Ultimately, we do get him toward the end of the series, but we do see that there is no messing around. This guy isn't going to lead like Darth Vader. He's going to lead like a general. And I do see certain points throughout, Thrawn's sort of like interactions that he is kind of like, going to be setting up the First Order. We're seeing that these are just like the first crumbs of what could become the First Order later on. And I would like to see them dive a little bit deeper into how, the Empire ultimately becomes the First Order. And seeing sort of like these shambles be picked up and put in their place, so that when we see the sequel trilogy, we can start to understand where these pieces are coming from. And we do get to see Hera in this series, which is also a new character to me as well, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is fantastic and shows a lot of plot in this show, which a lot of people have been noticing online. But ultimately, she is a fantastic character, and I cannot help but say that it's so cool to see Obi-Wan and Hera, Ewan McGregor and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is a couple in real life, are both now in the Star Wars universe. Yeah, that is very interesting to see both of them in the Star Wars series. And funny enough, they are in different eras of Star Wars, so the possibility of them crossing paths is slim, but who knows? That would be really interesting to see, like, an Obi-Wan ghost pop up throughout, maybe season 2 of Ahsoka, which, by the way, is most definitely kind of set up in this show. Now, we do also get introduced to what they call Dark Jedis. They are not Sith. These are not Sith characters. They are what they consider Dark Jedis. They are Jedis, but they are sort of like rebel Jedis, which do not follow, true Jedi fashion. They are kind of like on the darker side of Jedis. Not Sith, but they are Dark Jedis, and we are introduced to these two in the series. And these two Dark Jedis are Shin Hati and Baylan Skoll. Now, Baylan Skoll is essentially her mentor, Shin Hati's mentor, and he's kind of like teaching her to become a new version of a Dark Jedi as well. And we do see their relationship throughout the series. It's not really dug deep into. I mean, they don't really get very deep into this relationship due to the fact that this is Ahsoka's show and not, the Baylan and Shin Hati, show. So ultimately, we don't get too much into their relationship. But to the points where we do get her relationship with Baylan, Shin and Baylan's relationship, we do see that the apprenticeship is there. Baylan is there to guide her in this quest. And I have to say, it is very, very, very sad that we do not have Ray Stevenson with us anymore, because he plays this role really well. He commands the scene that he is in. You can feel the weight in which he is playing this character. And, there's just no way of critiquing his work, knowing that is, his legacy now. His kind of like his final role, while he was still alive, is in this, as this character. And he gave it his all, which I have to say was absolutely amazing. And there's just no critiquing that. And, seeing Shin Hati as well, she's fantastic. This is a character that I definitely want to see that growth, move on into the next season of Ahsoka, which would be very cool to see, and kind of see where maybe Ahsoka could bring her to the light, take her away from the darkness in a second season of Ahsoka. Now, I think the true highlight of this entire series happened in, I believe, the 3rd episode of this show, or was the 4th episode. It was either the 3rd or 4th episode of the season, in which we get to see, finally, Hayden Christensen come back as Anakin Skywalker in what they call the World Between Worlds, which is a concept that's pretty new to me, mind you. I've watched all the movies, I've watched Mandalorian, I've watched all these other, things that have to do with Mandalorian, including, Book of Boba Fett. But the World Between Worlds is something that was only introduced, based on my understanding, was either in Clone Wars or in Rebels that they actually, promote that. But this is a whole new concept to me. And I think it's very interesting that we are actually talking about, this sort of concept of afterlife in the, in the Star Wars universe, because most people would never really connect those two things, since we see Force ghosts, but we never see, like, a sort of like time tunnel in a way where, they grab someone's like projection from one time and kind of like meet each other at a specific point. And that's really interesting to see in Star Wars, and that could also play into a whole slew of different things later on if we actually ever get the Rey movie, which was teased at at Star Wars Celebration, I believe, last year. So it is very interesting to see this concept play out and see Hayden Christensen come back and actually play Anakin Skywalker again. He does a fantastic job in that episode and sort of like guiding Ahsoka in a way, like almost reteaching her specific values. And, you know, I really like to see him kind of like almost transform into Darth Vader as himself, and see like the projection of Vader showing up in this series is just phenomenal. Probably one of the coolest shots ever in Star Wars shows up in this show. And I just love seeing Hayden Christensen come back and play Anakin Skywalker and show us the difference between Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker, which is something that this show in specific was able to nail, which is the difference between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. You know, Anakin Skywalker is, you know, someone who was still learning, still trying to become the best version of a Jedi that he could, while Darth Vader kind of is a different, you know, soul. It's almost as if, you know, Darth Vader incarnated himself inside Anakin and became this sort of like evil spirit in a way. So it is very interesting to see the separation between the two and see how, you know, Ahsoka is able to really nail those little details throughout the series. And I think this series ends off in a pretty good note. You know, we see Ahsoka with Sabine, and they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do next. We see Hera meeting up with, you know, Ezra on the ship. We are presented with, you know, what exactly are these stormtroopers that, honestly, at first, I didn't know this, but somebody online predicted that these stormtroopers that were walking around aren't actually just living beings. They're just corpses that are like zombies. They're like zombified stormtroopers, which is wild, and they're being possessed by, you know, this Night Sister. And that is a really interesting concept in and of itself, because you never really think about zombies and Star Wars, and they were able to pull off zombies in Star Wars on Ahsoka. So it is pretty creepy to see these sort of like dead stormtroopers kind of like rise up and kind of like, you know, try to battle it all out. And yeah, that is a very interesting concept that I hope that they probably revisit in the future. And I think that they will, considering that the entire army that is behind Thrawn is actually commanded or commandeered by, you know, this Night Sister, which is kind of wild to think about. And I think after we see, you know, Balin, he's off on a mountain, which is like a carved, you know, person, which then again, I'm not familiar with who those people are, but based on my very limited understanding, these are people who are the first Siths, I believe. And he's kind of like on this mountain, I think in search of, you know, another temple where he can find others like him. And that's a very interesting thing that we have to, you know, discuss in a later time, probably in the season 2 of Ahsoka. And I think this show also ends with probably one of the most bittersweet shots, which is Hayden Christensen as Anakin, as a Force ghost, kind of looking at Ahsoka, kind of like, you know, I'm proud of you, you know, and that look at her like, I'm proud of who you've become and what you've been capable of doing. So this is a really, really cool series that I think a season 2 should definitely happen. I think that if they are sitting down right now and working towards a season 2 for this show, I'm 100% on board, and I really, really want to see what they're capable of doing with Ahsoka in a second season. So yes, I do think that Ahsoka nailed every single piece that it could have. I don't think that this show had any sort of like major filler episodes A lot of shows recently, whether it be, Star Wars or even Marvel, has been creating series, and sometimes they throw in a filler episode, which you see that has no context or any sort of thing that could add on to the story. But this show was able to keep everything going and flowing, and I think that's amazing. And they should definitely focus on making shows and stories like this in the future, because this is what I want from Star Wars. This is what when I watch Ahsoka, to me, Star Wars, when you say Star Wars, the first thing that comes to mind is the style of storytelling that we see in Ahsoka. And if they are able to continue this sort of storytelling throughout, the next couple of series that they have, whether it be The Acolyte or Skeleton Crew or, any sort of series that they have after Ahsoka, we're going to have a fun time with Star Wars in the future. And I just can't wait to see what new things are coming from Star Wars. But ultimately, all of this is just what I think of Ahsoka. But I want to know what you think of Ahsoka. Did you like the series? Did you not like the series? What do you think worked? What do you think did not work? Did you even watch Ahsoka? I want to know from you down below in the comments, and I want to have this discussion with you guys. So go down there, talk to me. I want to have this discussion. And while you're down there, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified when new videos go live on this channel. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video.